has been submitted by Deputies Lucinda Creighton, Colm Keaveney, Claire Daly, Michael Kitt and Robert Troy. And that is the need for an independent inquiry into the deaths in mother and baby homes. Okay, so each deputy has 2 minutes each. Okay, so I'll start with Deputy Lucinda Creighton.
Thank you very much. Cahirla, I actually thought it was 4 minutes, but it's okay.
Because there's so many deputies, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate my colleague, Minister Flanagan, on his appointment. I haven't had the opportunity so far. I would like to, I suppose, add my voice here in the chamber to the shock and frankly the disgust that so many people feel over this discovery. And I would like to particularly pay tribute to the work of 2 individuals. Firstly, local historian Catherine Corliss, who has done such assiduous work in uncovering the facts of this horrific case in Tuam, and also the journalistic work and endeavour of Alison O'Reilly. And thanks to those 2 individuals, we now know that between 1925 and 1961, the home in Tuam was recorded as the place of death for 796 babies and children, which is a shocking and deeply disturbing discovery. We know that there was no information relating to their burial in any graveyard or cemetery to be found, and we understand that one possible explanation for this is the discrepancy is that the bodies were buried on the grounds of the home itself without any record, without any documentation. The lack, I suppose, of a national outcry over this initially is perhaps, sadly, an indication of the sort of way in which Irish people have been desensitised to this sort of discovery in respect of how both the Church and State have let down some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And I think that that is something that we all need to reflect on. It really is quite sad and quite shocking. I think it's a damning indictment of the maternity care which was provided both by Church and State, that during this period,
Deputy, just to say your time's up.
Infant mortality was significantly higher than it is today, but it was also much higher amongst so-called illegitimate children than it was amongst the rest of society, and that is something that we need to reflect on in terms of how we cherish our children, equally or otherwise.
Okay, thanks, Deputy. The next Deputy is Deputy Colm Keaveney's name, but he's not here at the moment. So, Deputy Claire Daly.
Thanks, Chair. I think for anybody to say that these events are surprising would be untrue, because the fact is that the scandals of the mother and baby homes have long been an open secret. In fact, the horrors of Tuam were investigated in 1944 and found children emaciated, pot-bellied, uncared for, and numbers far in excess of what should have been. The records from that home were handed over to Galway City Council in 1961, and the grave was found in 1971. And now in 2014, hands are being thrown up and people are saying, oh, we knew nothing about this. The reality is that Irish society knew full well about the scandals that went on in the mother and baby homes, where women were exploited for unpaid labour, half-starved. Everybody knew you went in there to have a baby, but you never left with one. Either child died in there, or else they were forcibly and often illegally adopted inside those institutions. And it is because of this behaviour that the State has failed to acknowledge what has gone on there. Now, Minister, last year I handed to your predecessor a study and report commissioned by Adoption Rights Now, into similar scandals in Shanross Abbey, Castle Pollard and Bessborough Mother and Baby Homes, where that organisation had done clinical research which showed the mortality rates, that almost 50% of the children there ended up dead, hundreds of them actually dying and buried in angels' plots, which people do not have access to presently. So the state knew about these things. Now, the remedy that we need on this now, the denial has to stop. There needs to be a full inquiry into the treatment of women, the forcible removement of their children, and an opening of the books to assist those people to get the information and the records that they desire. We need to have the plots handed over with access to parents and family members and so on, and ideas like justice and accountability and compensation have to be dealt with here, or we've learned nothing from the situation in the past.
Thanks, Deputy. The next Deputy is Deputy Michael Kish.
Clearly, thank you, and I want to support the call for an independent inquiry into the deaths in the mother and baby homes. And could I say, as a person who has represented East Galway and Tuam for over 3 decades, I'm very saddened and horrified at the information we've got on the large number of deceased children involved. And I've spoken to Minister Flanagan about this. I want to thank him for his hearing, but I do also want to ask him about what he refers to the cross-department response, because I understand there's been mention of it could possibly be 4 departments involved in examining the situation here, and particularly the arrangements for children to be buried in this mass grave. It was described in the journal as a mass grave filled to the brim with tiny bones and skulls. Certainly it is a terrible indictment of how we cherish children. And I think also, Minister, that you probably would agree that the Bon Secours sisters have to act upon their responsibility in this matter, as they were the people who had the home for mothers and babies there. Also, I understand that the sisters and the members of the local Children's Home Graveyard Committee have met to discuss a planned memorial of the unmarked children's graveyard in Tuam, and that the names will be recorded. And I would ask the Minister and the Government indeed, to work with the local committee in Tuam and with the families of the deceased to have a dignified reinterment of the remains of the children in Tuam. This situation is so serious that, you know, when you think of children just being discarded, that I think it's time also to find out exactly what records exist in the old health board which preceded the HSE, what records exist in Galway County Council, because there's, even in the reports in the media, there's some dispute as to where the records are, and I hope the Minister might be able to give us some information, and I hopefully will have a minute later on to ask some other questions. Thank you. Clearly.
Okay, Deputy Troy.
Thank you, Cahirlock. Well, Minister, reports over the past few days have once again reminded us of how religious institutions, institutions of the state, and indeed society itself, has failed women and children. The horrific revelations of the appalling treatment of thousands of babies and their mother have not received the urgent attention warranted by government and state authorities. The government has confirmed the establishment of an interdepartmental initiative, and quite simply, Minister, I don't believe this goes far enough, nor do the Adoption Rights Alliance. It's an ad hoc response to media reports, despite having received a report by the Adoption Rights Now in July 2013. And while quite rightly there's a lot of attention on Tuam in the last couple of days, this report by the Adoption Rights Now confirms that this is a much wider issue, with anything between 300 and 500 babies buried in Castle Pollard. We've Shanross Abbey in Roscoe and Bessborough in Cork. And having read the report in the last couple of days, I'm horrified to read the brutal, barbaric and inhumane treatment of innocent little babies and their mothers. And quite frankly, Minister, nothing short of a full apology from the Taoiseach and a full independent investigation is what is needed, and is what is deserved by these women and the families of these babies, having been subjected to what they have been subjected. And we need to ensure that the Gardaí and the forensics need to be involved in these mass graves. And while our attention is on today, we must not forget about the living adopted, who currently are living in identity limbo, and who, unlike the unanimous dead, have an opportunity to reconnect with their families. And I think you need to put in place a parallel process to ensure that both issues are dealt with, and dealt with without any further delay.
Okay. Minister for.
Thank you, Concorla. Before the clock commences, can I congratulate the Minister on his appointment? And we might have congratulated each other, or certainly congratulate him on the corridor, but I want to put it on the record of the House. I'd like to congratulate him on his appointment to the post of Minister. Las Concorla, the Tuam home operated from the 1920s until its closure in 1961, and during that time there was a memorable phrase in my town, particularly one constituent continues to remind me of it, and I quote, "There was a deliberate unknowing of what was going on in both it and other institutions at the time." And one of the aims, Las Concorla, in understanding the past is that we have a better understanding on how we approach the future. And in that respect, I know the Minister would have grave concerns and share my concerns with respect to families who are being evicted today in Dublin, and children as young as 3 and 4 being holed up in a hotel as a consequence of seeing their parents being evicted from their house, or indeed children who are in the care of the HSE who go missing, vanish, or a situation where we have children under the provision of direct provision and the welfare of those children under the auspices of the state. There are many examples that we could focus our minds on, given that the dark warnings of history have currently presented with the House this week. On the Tuam House itself, it's plain and evident that the public are very concerned about reports that are emerging, Minister. They are aware of the story, and they're quite outraged with one side or other of the presentation to date. And Minister, while I welcome this morning steps to proceed with a preliminary sort of establishment or scoping of facts, clearly I'm saying to you, Minister, that the public won't be caught. And I know that you're not that type of politician. And we can't have a situation where we fall victim, particularly of a territorial dispute, between interdepartmental tensions. And I want you to explain to the House today what authority you have to bring this together, if you can do that. And in light of the inquiry, it would seem necessary for me to ask you today, have you contacted the Guards with respect to any potential criminal investigation on this matter? What measures have the Guards taken since this morning, since you've announced to secure the site in question and to ensure that all records from the home have been secured and that the site is secured as we speak? And if no such actions have taken with respect to the last 2 points, can we expect that they would take place immediately? Have the government been in contact with the Gardaí since your announcement at Leaders' Questions this morning?
Minister.
Thank you, Dr. Hirlock. I wish to thank the deputies for raising this important issue, which has been met with both shock and horror over the past few days. The situation in Tuam in particular is almost too graphic and horrible to believe. Young, innocent children, their lives so short and harrowing, where it seems, even in death, not given a proper, decent or humane burial. While the revelations in Tuam are indeed graphic and appalling, they are a reminder of a wider and darker past, where our children were far from cherished. The history of mother and baby homes in Ireland in the early and middle decades of the 20th century reflects a brutally unforgiving response by society, by the religious and state institutions, and in many cases even families, to young women and children where they were most in need and most vulnerable. Tuam was not unique in Ireland as a mother and baby home. Mother and baby homes were not unique in Ireland as cold and brutal places of refuge from an unforgiving society. And Ireland was, at least in some respects, not entirely unique amongst countries in dealing with its most vulnerable citizens in a manner that would not be countenanced in a civilised democracy. But in Ireland today we are confronted by the fact that as a newly established state we besmirched our lofty ambitions and ideals, and made hollow our promise to cherish all of the children of the nation equally. Whereas, in their day, these women and children were unjustly made to feel so much shame, we must now carry this shame for how this country dealt with them in their time of need. The revelations in Tuam, County Galway, have brought to the fore the situation in other mother and baby homes throughout the country. The practice in mother and baby homes have to date not featured prominently in the various reviews and investigations which have dealt with many of the past abuses which were inflicted on vulnerable citizens, many of them women and children. It's fully recognised by me and by my government colleagues that we need to establish the truth. As has been announced, consideration is being given to the best means of addressing the harrowing details emerging regarding the children who died some years ago in mother and baby homes and the many questions raised regarding these deaths. We will properly review these issues. We will not confine this review to Tuam. My colleagues and I have tasked officials from key government departments with scoping these issues so that government can make decisions on the precise content, the format, the method of organising this review. Relevant government departments have already met today. We're working together in preparation for the government's early consideration and determination of the best course of action. The cross-departmental initiative underway is examining these matters and will report to government on how they might be addressed. Departments involved include the Department of Justice and Equality, the Department of Health, the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, the Department of Education and Skills, and the Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government. Amongst the decisions to be made by government in finalising arrangements as part of its overall deliberations on the format and conduct of the review will be the assignment of lead responsibility for implementation. Such scoping work is essential if fully informed decisions are to be made and matters are to be dealt with in an effective way. This is the experience in effectively initiating successful review processes in recent years. The work is proceeding speedily and promptly. It will consider all of the issues which have arisen and the particular factors which the review will need to take into account include, for example, the passage of time. Government will be kept up to date and expects to have the product of this consideration before the end of this month. Fortunately, I can state that much has changed in Irish society in relation to the rights of mothers and children. In the domain of my own responsibilities, I can point to legislative change to reflect a greater regard for children's welfare and children's rights. However, in saying this, I in no way wish to detract from the pain and hurt that was caused to so many women and children by the events of the past. The government is committed to ensuring that the most appropriate action is taken to ensure that the concerns with regard to these deeply tragic and disturbing past events can be addressed and addressed in a prompt and swift manner. Thank you.
Okay, each deputy has a further minute each, so if they can keep it as close to that as they can. Starting with Deputy Creighton.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and thank you, Minister, for your reply. I think the interdepartmental group will clearly have a lot of work to do, and I welcome the early deadline in terms of reporting back to government. I think that's essential because, as we know from previous bitter experience, these things can drag on. So I would urge you, Minister, to stick to the deadline of the end of the month. I think it's extremely important. One question that I have for you is, I suppose, following on from Deputy Keaveney's questions relating to securing the site and so on. I consider some of the remarks which have been attributed to An Garda Síochána, where they said that there was no suggestion of impropriety. I think that was premature in the extreme. I think it was presumptuous and not appropriate. And I hope that you have communicated that to An Garda Síochána, or that figures in government have done so. And I would ask you, Minister, whether you expect that there will now be a criminal investigation into events in the home in Tuam, because quite clearly there is an abundance of evidence to suggest that there was impropriety, and I think that it is important that not only is there an official investigation, but also the criminal investigation into activities there. Thank you.
The next is Deputy Colin Keaveney.
Minister, again, I welcome the announcement that we're going to establish fact, and the scoping exercise, I think, would pale into irrelevance if we don't take immediate steps with the cooperation of the Garda Síochána to secure the site. If we are going to secure truth and establish fact, we could be on the edge of something incredibly serious for our society and for the Irish people with respect to the emergence of truth. And we need to take whatever step necessary to ensure that the outcome of this investigation cannot be prejudiced. We need to actually secure the site as soon as possible. Can I ask you again, Minister, have you contacted the Gardaí with respect to taking action to secure the site? Are we going to have a situation that, in the conclusion of this debate, that every action is going to be taken by government to ensure that the quality of this investigation cannot be challenged by any third party or the courts?
The next is Deputy Michael Kitt, or sorry, Deputy Daly, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, the report which your department has had now for almost a year concluded by saying and talking about the children who died. It talked about children who had never had a name, a birth certificate, a death certificate or a baptism. And they concluded that the adoption machine in Ireland is directly responsible for and guilty of the most truly evil crimes against humanity, a slaughter of innocents, a war waged against pregnant girls as young as 12, including the victims of rape and incest and their babies. And he says, if these cold facts don't warrant a public inquiry, what does? Now, your department didn't carry out a public inquiry. I've raised this issue many times here, and nobody really wanted to know about them when the facts were known and made available. Now, if we're serious that we're learning the lesson, then that wrong has to be acknowledged first out. And the Irish state was quite happy to banish pregnant girls who had the cheek to get pregnant outside marriage and their babies and just disappear them. And the religious ran the institutions, and an adoption racket was carried out by the state with the religious orders involved and the state as well. So what we need for closure in this is a full acknowledgement by the state of its role, the holding of those responsible accountable for their actions, compensation, and particularly a handing over of the records and the addresses of the missing identities of thousands of Irish children, many of them adults now, with their history stolen because of an institutional discrimination against women and their children. And dealing with the rights of those people who were illegally adopted has been ignored far too long and is at the centre of this issue also.
Okay, Deputy Kitt.
August, just to thank the Minister, first of all, clearly for giving us an assurance that before the end of the month there will be a report to government. I hope that we can get an opportunity, Minister, to debate that report in this House. And could I also commend the local historian, in the case of Tuam, the local historian Catherine Corliss, on the work that she has done. I just again repeat the point that there is some issue about where records and material has been filed. Some people are saying with the County Council, more saying with the old Western Health Board, and perhaps you could clarify that, if not today, at some other occasion. Just to say also, Minister, that this issue of the cruelty and indifference to vulnerable children and mothers and babies, it was raised by what's been called the most famous priest in the world, Father Edward Flanagan, back in 1946 when he visited Ireland, having come back from Nebraska, and where he talked about the treatment of children in church and state care as a scandal, unchristlike and wrong. And indeed, Peter McVerry was one of the people who often championed Father Flanagan as a man who inspired him. And it's very evident that issues like homelessness that Father McVerry is still fighting for, it's now been very much reported that there's youth homelessness now, as well as the fact that families are homeless as well as individuals. So I think, you know, a lot of issues like that are coming back to haunt us, like the issues that were there in the 40s that Father Flanagan spoke about. And I do hope that you can report back to us on other issues that I raised as soon as possible. Thank you.
Deputy Troy.
Thank you, Cahirach. Thank the Minister for his reply. And unfortunately, Minister, I don't have the full confidence in an interdepartmental initiative. I take it it's your department that's going to head up this initiative, the very same department that has sat on a report for almost 12 months. And were it not for the local historian, were it not for investigative journalists, we might not be in here talking about this issue here today. It's an extremely time-sensitive issue, and it needs to get the priority that it deserves. And can I ask, Minister, why is it, or will you agree to, at a minimum, when your interdepartmental initiative comes back, to explore the possibility of a full independent inquiry? Because I think that's what is needed, a full independent inquiry. We also need all adoption records to be opened immediately in line with international best practice. And what has happened, a similar scenario happened in relation to forced adoptions in Australia. And last year in Australia, the then Australian Prime Minister Gillard, offered a full, frank apology for the state's role in the adoption crisis, and also put in place proper, robust channels to ensure people who are out there without their proper identity can go and get their identity. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is act in accordance with international best practice and act in a humane, compassionate manner.
Okay, Minister.
Thanks. I want to again thank the deputies for raising this important issue. And could I just say that the object of this exercise is to seek and uncover the truth. This is not something that can be done overnight. And I do state again that the deadlines that we have imposed are such as to ensure that there will be no delay in dealing with this issue. Deputies Creighton and Keaveney mentioned the matter of the Garda Síochána and my contact with the Garda Síochána. I haven't been in contact with the Garda Síochána. The Garda Síochána, Cathaoirleach, is an independent state police investigating organisation. Independent. I don't direct the Garda Síochána on matters of crime. I don't initiate crime investigations, but I do say here that the Gardaí themselves will be expected to exercise judgment with regard to alleged criminal activity in the same way as any criminal investigation. On the matter of the interdepartmental group, it is important that every department with any involvement is not only consulted but is activated to take appropriate action in this regard. I mentioned the Department of Justice, my own Department of Children, obviously, the Department of Education and Skills, the Department of Health. I could add the Department of Social Protection, with particular reference to the records the Deputy Daly quite rightly refers to, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. In fact, the vast majority of government departments will have an involvement in this issue. So, as I say, I will be keeping government informed as to the progress. The report will be presented to government by the end of this month, and thereafter the government will decide at the earliest opportunity on the extent and scope of further investigation, inquiry. And the House will have an opportunity to debate this issue at that stage. I can assure Deputy Daly that the issues as raised by her, with particular reference to the document that she referred to, will be examined by the interdepartmental group and will form part of the current scoping exercise. Could I say to Deputies Kitt and Creighton and Troy and Deputy Keaveney, who has left the debate, I am not ruling out anything in terms of government action here, but I would ask deputies to allow for an element of time and space for the various interests in the various departments to come together. Already they've had their first meeting. We've put a time frame in place, and I will keep the House informed as matters progress over the next number of weeks. Thank you.
Minister. Okay, so that brings to conclusion the topical issues